So again,
Okay.
welcome. Sorry about that little delay. I just want to start off by saying thank you, everyone who has joined us today. I know that your time is valuable, so I will do my best to make sure that this presentation is on time and that it has value for you as an attendee. I just want to quickly go around and introduce the presenters that we will have for this training today. And Becca, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Becca Edwards. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the CIRES Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director.
And my name is Lucia Harrop. I use she, her pronouns. I work with CIRES, and I'm the series liaison with NOAA.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Jazmin Surface. I use she, her pronouns as well, and I'm a CIRES HR generalist.
So just to manage expectations about what this training will cover so you can get a feeling for what it'll be like, we're going to start with an ASA overview, what the process is, and general guidelines on completion dates and procedures. We'll then go to an overview of supervisor responsibilities and resources available to you in support of this ASA process. We'll talk about the career track and how that is connected to the ASA process. Becca will cover some diversity and inclusion information, what it is gathered on the app and how it is used and why we're gathering it. And then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. This training should take about 90 minutes with time left over for questions and answers at the end. The session will be recorded and the recording and slide deck will be posted at the link that I put in the chat. I can drop that in later as well, shortly after the live session. It usually takes about a day. So one thing you might notice about this training is that we're going to read the slides. That's an inclusivity practice that we're going to have. So please be patient with us, but that just allows us all to follow along with the training materials. And closed captioning is also turned on at this time. So feel free to put questions in the chat. I will pause periodically, but we'll go ahead and get started with the content of the training at this point. So who completes the ASA? So if there's anyone on this training who doesn't need to be here, this is the time to pay attention so that you can excuse yourself if this does not apply to you. So all researchers and staff hired before July 1st of 2024, this includes both full and part-time employees. This includes series postdocs, including hourly and VFP, and our hourly research staff, PRAs, research associates, and research professors. This does not include hourly temporary employees, student hourly employees, visitors, no cost appointments, NSF and NRC postdocs, and para or ORP working retirees. So if any of those who does not applies to you, you can have this time back. So what is the annual summary of accomplishments? This is the annual performance evaluation process for CIRES research faculty. It is also a university requirement. This is a tool for capturing accomplishments and facilitating evaluation and feedback. It is the first step in the yearly merit increase process. You can't get a raise without this. It is a critical process for evaluating career growth goals and timelines, thus the connection to our career track. And it's an opportunity for evaluating changing work goals and objectives. I like to point out at this point that the annual summary is only one part of the employee and supervisor relationship. You should be having periodic check-ins with your direct reports. Issues that come up should be addressed as they arise. Don't wait until the ASA if there's something going on. The ASA should not be a surprise to either the supervisor or the supervisee. So if there are successes or challenges that are ongoing, those shouldn't be raised at this point in the process. It should happen in real time as you're having those successes and challenges. CIRES HR can help you facilitate communication at any time if you are having challenges. Performance management training is critical for successful performance management. So this training, as well as other trainings offered by CUHR and offered by CIRES HR and others even outside of the organizations, can help support this process and relationship. Both employees and supervisors can benefit from these training opportunities. They're not intended only for supervisors or leadership. So we're going to go over just a few performance management fundamentals. The ASA is a critical tool in helping with this, but performance management is on top of that. So this is to align work and resources to clearly define goals and mission essentials for effective collaboration, setting clear expectations for employees and supervisors, providing ongoing opportunities for direct and constructive feedback, building relationships and establishing a foundation of trust, having open and transparent communication, and addressing issues as they arise. Another important part of this is avoiding biases, which Becca will help me go over later. And we also offered a training on this very recently. And as I said before, CIRES HR, CUHR, and outside entities offer support resources. These are the ones that are specific to CIRES HR. We have a training catalog that is available on Inside CIRES. You can access all of the trainings. They are recorded, and the slide decks and transcripts for these are posted at these links. This slide deck will be posted along with this recording so that you can directly link to them. This includes the supervisor best practices, diversity and inclusion information session, and the performance management session offered by Kelly Leandro in March of this year. I encourage you to please review this training library before you embark on evaluations. While these sessions are not mandatory for supervisors, they are highly recommended, especially if you're a supervisor. All supervisor trainings are open to science advisors as well. So Becca, if you wouldn't mind taking this slide.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So we did a training recently on implicit bias, and so we're bringing some of our definitions from that training here to support you in thinking about how implicit bias might show up in evaluation. So it can show up in a number of ways, and interrupting these biases can have you have a more objective and accurate view of performance. And that's along the way, as Lucia has been saying, not just at the evaluation point. So what is implicit bias? It's the attitudes and stereotypes that affect our understandings, actions, and decisions in a subconscious manner. These biases are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. So part of what we did at this training was talked quite a bit about how you can bring up your awareness, right? These are things that are happening without you thinking much about it. It's more that you have an emotion or gut reaction about somebody, and then that starts to influence the way that you interact with them. So we're hoping to provide some ways, first, that you can sort of be more aware of those biases, you can interrupt them, but we're also going to offer a session on how to develop really great strategies around giving feedback so that you feel more confident starting those conversations and getting more of a sense of curiosity about where the other person is coming from, as opposed to feeling that you're giving a one-way communication. So we'll be offering some more of those workshops. We offered the workshop in April, and we did put the recording and slides here, but we're going to offer this on a quarterly basis along with the feedback sessions as well.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Becca.
Lucia.
So those were some of our support resources that are local to our CIRES HR group, but we also have a wealth of resources that are available from CU Central HR. These trainings that I have listed here are the CU Boulder hosted trainings. Some of the most popular trainings are Clifton Strengths. This is excellent for learning about where you fall into the spectrum, how you're different from your coworkers, and how you can build effective teams. You learn about different communication styles and personality types, and how we can come together in our differences to be stronger teams. Crucial Conversations is also a really popular training. This training offers an opportunity to learn how to effectively navigate high impact conversations. And then Leading at the Speed of Trust. This training allows you to see how lack of trust hinders teams and how to build a culture of trust to overcome those barriers. I like to mention here specifically, since COVID, we've moved into a hybrid space. This is the future of work. But this hybrid space creates special considerations for performance and team management, especially for supervisors and managers. There is a training series that's offered by CU HR on work, supervision, and management in the hybrid space. Lauren Harris did offer a condensed 1-hour series-specific version, and this is linked here in the slides. And there are additional free and paid trainings available if you fill out the professional development request linked here, and CIRES will offer funds for those on approval that do not come from your grants. So we're going to go over just very bare bones necessary components of successful supervision here. This is going to include a transparent evaluation process. So that is the ASA. Addressing performance and disciplinary concerns informally and formally as they arise with proper documentation. The training that's going to back up these disciplinary concerns and the documentation that's required here is going to be the performance management training that was offered by Kelly Leandro. The ability to have difficult conversations, timely performance feedback, documentation practices, and recognizing successes and accomplishments. Those conversations, again, need to be ongoing and timely in order for them to be relevant and in order for the ASA process to not be a surprise to either yourself or your supervisee. You need to understand the basics of leave reporting. We do have a number of resources available to you, including a My Leave walkthrough. But if you ever have challenges or questions about leave, please do submit tickets. Luann Line is excellent at walking us through, and we also have a central leave team that works on family and FMLA concerns. Oops, well, okay. I won't go back, but we also want to have effective planning processes, goal setting, and adjusting as necessary. Things come up during the year, and as COVID taught us, being agile and adaptable is extremely important. Again, those ongoing feedback and regular check-ins are very important. And then consistency between your ongoing feedback and the ASA evaluation. So if you're telling your employee that everything's going great all through the year, and then suddenly there's a big issue written up on the ASA, that's a signal that maybe some of that ongoing feedback is not being consistent. So the ASA process sequence is going to be first, the employee is going to complete their portion. This is due by June 30th. And then the second is going to be the supervisor completes their assessment of contributions and plans after that has been completed. This is the point at which the science advisor can participate. If they're participating, they'll complete their assessment. The science advisor input should be provided before the supervisor write-up. And that's just to ensure that anything that the science advisor has to say can be incorporated into the supervisor assessment. The third step is the supervisor, and if appropriate, the science advisor will meet to discuss and reach agreement, or at least to reach and talk it through, right? Just because you've completed the ASA doesn't necessarily imply that you concur with everything that's said there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The fourth step is the supervisor will enter the final performance rating sheet on our app, and then the employee and supervisor will sign the rating sheet via the app. And this is important. This locks the record. So if you're at a point where you're still iterating, or you still want your employee to be making some additions or changes, or there's disagreement at this stage and there's a conversation still happening, don't put in the ASA rating, even if you have agreed on a rating, because you want to make sure that the system stays open. We can unlock it, but it's just an extra step. So just be aware that once you hit that submit button on that rating sheet, it does lock the record. All documents can be edited until the signed copy is submitted, and it's not intended to be a one-way piece of communication. The supervisor can write things, the employee can write things, and you can go back and forth until there is a conversation. Once it goes to the vice chancellor, the process is locked. So there does come a point where you can't go back. So just be aware of that. And those deadlines in here that we'll go over in a moment, that August 4th deadline is really the final one, and you want to be aware of that deadline. Here are our submission deadlines for this year. Right now, and actually all through the year, if you want to use the ASA system as a note-keeping application, you can log into the ASA app and begin entering your information. By June 30th, please hit that submit button as an employee. So this goes to your supervisor. And as an employee, be aware that anything that you put into the ASA app before you submit can't be seen by anyone except yourself. So you can use it as a note-taking application. Just make sure that you finalize it before you hit that submit button. They will get an email saying your supervisee or your direct report has submitted their ASA, and then they can log in and see that. At that point, as the employee, you can't make edits to it unless your supervisor sends it back to you. From July 1st to July 21st, the science advisor has an opportunity to read the ASA and then begin their assessment and write up their forms. If the science advisor input is being used, it must be input before the supervisor input and no later than July 21st. So last year was the first year that we had an earlier science advisor deadline. And this is just to allow our supervisors to consider the input from our science advisors and also give them enough time to do their write-up incorporating that feedback so that they're not getting that feedback on the day of the final deadline. So if your science advisor is participating, please be aware that that July 21st is the preferred deadline for their input. And that gives our supervisors until August 4th to put their submissions in, and also leaves time for those meetings that should happen. From July 1st to July 28th, the supervisor has time to read the ASA, complete the forms, and the science advisor input after July 21st can be included, but it will be included in the next year's evaluation period. So from July 1st to July 28th, any time in here, it's a big, long deadline, right? So if the science advisor and the supervisor can get their evaluations done really early, that's fine. You can meet and discuss, and then complete the rating sheet. And by August 4th, this deadline is really important. The supervisor and employee must have signed rating sheets submitted to CIRES HR via DocuSign. And I need to update this slide because it's no longer emailed to CIRES ASA. That process has been automated, which is fantastic. So we'll go over that in a moment. A quick
Lucia,
note
there's
here.
a great question in the chat.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Gabby was asking who will or should communicate the new deadline to the science advisors.
That's a great question. So we do send out all of our communications to our science advisors. So they will be seeing this content via the admin news. They also, anytime a supervisee submits a assessment via the system, they have access to this. They're given an email ping where they're pulled into the system. They all have access to Inside CIRES. So in some ways, it's up to them to engage with the content, right? We can't force them. It's optional for them to participate. So they will be getting information flow. The only piece of information that they don't get is the signed PDF with the rating at the end of the process. So they were invited to this training. They'll be seeing the admin news, they'll be seeing the weekly events, and they are invited into the process as soon as their advisees submit via the system. Hopefully that answers the question. Sorry, so back to the missing rating sheets. This is a university rule. If we don't have a rating sheet for yourself, both you and your supervisor are not eligible for merit for that year. We do everything we can in CIRES HR to make sure that everyone has these, but just be aware that the consequences are real for not participating in this process. So a note on ASA deadlines. Failing to meet the deadline can have real consequences for CIRES getting our merit roster to CU Central HR. HR requests that packets are submitted on time, except for unavoidable and unexpected scenarios. So this would be an unexpected illness. If you know that you're going on parental leave and you anticipate that that's going to start in the middle of this process, you can turn those packets in early. And it's between you and your supervisor to decide what a good time frame for you works. And even if that means that you turn in your employee portion before June 30, that's okay. If you are working on a really high impact project and you think something amazing is going to happen in the last 2 weeks of June, talk about it. You don't have to have everything written in stone. This is meant to be a conversation as opposed to like a bullet point of things that you've accomplished during that time period. So it's okay to turn this in a little bit early. It's also okay for if the supervisor and you meet and discuss and decide, yeah, it's okay for you to turn this in a little late because I know you're taking a vacation, just as long as that August 4th deadline is honored. That's really the most important thing, because CIRES HR does need to get this to central HR, and we don't have a lot of flexibility on those deadlines. So if you know you're going to be on vacation, again, consider setting an earlier deadline for yourself, and reach out to HR in advance to get approval if deadlines are impossible. This is only a last resort for extraordinary circumstances. You've done everything, everything's been on track, and all of a sudden you're out sick for an extended period, or something else happens where you're not able to complete those deadlines. In general, the requests that we get are things that we could have planned for. So please be respectful of our time and the fact that this process impacts everyone in the Institute, and we really want to get this to HR on time. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the different pieces, and we'll start with the employee responsibilities. You're going to go to the ASA app on Inside CIRES, access from the homepage, and you're going to complete all sections under the professional summary. If you have no diversity and inclusion items to report, you can say not applicable. The sections under the professional activities are completed only if applicable. So not everyone is going to publish, not everyone is going to have presentations. Those are more a la carte, if you will. You'll want to do a telework agreement check-in. You will get a prompt before you submit to update your telework agreement. And you'll also get a DEPA check-in prompt. The DEPA is the disclosure of external professional activities, and this is required for all of our research staff. Please help CIRES stay in compliance with the DEPA. Every year we have a bunch of staff who haven't done this, and you can't propose if you don't have a current DEPA, and also it's a requirement from the university. So the ASA is a natural checkpoint for this and a reminder to do this. It doesn't take very long, maybe 10 minutes once you've accessed the system, and there are links on our blog that walk you through the steps of getting there. Again, the employee needs to submit their ASA to the supervisor by June 30. If you need to vary from that deadline for whatever reason, meet with your supervisor and discuss. The app doesn't lock at that point, so you can still continue to enter data there. But that deadline of June 30th for the employee is really intended to give your supervisor adequate time to consider the full evaluation, and also to give your science advisor, if they're participating, time to do those write-ups. And it's also your responsibility to sit down with your supervisor to discuss the rating. Obviously, this is a team effort. You'll revise and complete the ASA documents and sign by August 4th. The supervisor responsibilities. You're going to review what your employees have put in. You're going to consider the science advisor input if it has been provided. You're going to write your assessments. You're going to review the remote work agreements on Inside CIRES. And just a quick note here for supervisors, you don't need to redo agreements if they are still accurate. You only need to resubmit if there's a change. So if you've had a schedule change, if you've moved your days around, that's a signal that you need to redo them, even if they're over a year old. And I know that the guidance on the remote work agreements blog post says redo them every year, but really what that means is do a check-in every year. Make sure it's still current. You're also going to review career track goals and timelines. Jazmin is going to talk more about how these two processes are connected. There is a career track section in the ASA, and I encourage everyone to fill this out. You'll want to meet with your employee to discuss the documents, set employee goals for the next performance period, and edit documents if necessary. Science advisors are encouraged to attend this meeting if they provide input. Please be sure that the input is collected transparently. Employees should know who and what is contributing to their assessment. So if a science advisor isn't providing a written assessment through the application, just be transparent about any feedback that was collected with your direct reports. And then submit those assessments through Inside CIRES no later than August 4th. Don't make it weird. So science advisor responsibilities, these are all optional. Science advisor participation, we can't force their hands, but it is very helpful when we have it. It is up to the feds to decide to participate. So we can open the door. but whether or not they decide to participate via the written feedback is really up to them. The current guidance is that feedback should be confined to project level discussions and not individual performance. This level of participation of the science advisors is allowable and aligns with the guidance from the new cooperative agreement. So this guidance is consistent with what the feds should be hearing from their leadership side as well as from CIRES. The science advisors will review the submitted annual summary. And again, whether or not the science advisor is participating in a write-up or verbal conversations, they will get a copy of the write-up from the employee when they hit submit. Then they can write up or verbally provide the assessment by July 21st or earlier, as long as it's before the supervisor's assessment. Meet with the employee and supervisor to discuss ASA documents and make necessary edits. So the science advisor does not have to participate in any of these, but this is the ideal scenario if we are having science advisor participation. If your science advisor can't or won't provide an assessment, that's okay. There will be no penalty to the rating for those without science advisor input. Science advisors can provide feedback on the project, but again, should not comment on the performance or assign a rating. Please ensure consistency for all direct reports. For example, a science advisor should provide feedback for all advisees or none, and should use the same method for all advisees. This part is going to be a little challenging for our supervisors because it may be up to the supervisors to provide guidance to achieve this consistency. If you have a group of direct reports who have a number of different science advisors, that's going to be an additional challenge for you. Obviously, you can only control what you can control, but just attempt consistency and transparency in that feedback process. And this last bullet point, I just sort of covered it. Transparency should be considered for feedback from advisors, and employees should have access to that feedback. In the evaluation meeting, here are some things that you should cover. Job description updates. So if you're looking through your professional responsibilities portion and you notice that your position description is really out of date, you can do an update at this time, and you can find your current position description on the main page of Inside CIRES under the My CIRES info box at the upper right of the homepage. The ASA itself is a performance evaluation and feedback process. So you're going to want to talk through that and make sure that everyone understands what's been written. Highlight accomplishments and successes. Go over areas of improvement. Set goals for the next year. Do a career track review. Make sure you talk through that section specifically. If one of your direct reports is planning on doing a career track promotion packet in the next year, talk about it. Is there support there? Is there a deficit? Are all of the goals in alignment with where that person is in their career path? Make concurrence and edits if appropriate, and then sign the final reading sheet. Special considerations during the ASA. This is important to note, especially if you're a new supervisor. Equity and compression issues should not be addressed during this merit process. And please use these instead. Career track planning. This should be the go-to first for compensation discussions. Take a look at where this person sits in their career track. Is it appropriate for them to go to the next level? If career track is not the right step, an out-of-cycle increase can be considered if the employee has taken on more responsibility or if the job duties have changed significantly. Obviously, this is subject to HR review, but this is a conversation that you should have with your supervisee. If they're feeling like there's a compression issue or there's a compensation question, don't use this process as a way to address that. This is intended to be just a merit process. And I know that in the past, for some of our older supervisors, there were sometimes compression and other types of compensation issues addressed during this process, and that is not how we want to continue doing that. That was not an ideal or best practice for this. CIRES HR is always available to discuss, and CIRES leads may also be consulted. This would be in the case of an out of cycle or if you want to do a career track, but you're slightly out of sync with the number of years in service, things like that, CIRES HR can consult. Are there any questions in the chat? I see the number ticking up there, but I want to make sure that I'm not missing something.
There is a question for areas of improvement. Is this from the employee, the supervisor, or both? Is this the employee's time to reflect or time for supervisor to provide feedback they can be reflected upon?
That's a great question. I would say both, right? So if you as an employee are having a difficulty in a certain area, it's okay to say so and say, I need support in this area. I need whatever it might be. If it's, I'm not meeting my deadlines, what are the challenges that I'm meeting there? These should be talked about during your regular check-ins, right? Again, so this is one of those places where you don't want to have a big surprise of a struggle that's happening. And those reflection points should be happening all along. But it's good to spell those out because that can translate into a tangible goal or a training or an opportunity or a career track. So that reflection should be happening both on the part of the employee as they're writing up their section, but also on the part of the supervisor. And they might see something in the ASA that highlights a question for them, and they can do that. And again, you can always go back and make concurrence and edits if there's a question that comes up when the supervisor does their write-up. So hopefully that answered that question.
That was great, Lucia. I think the other question is just what compression means in this context.
Yes. Okay. So compression is the phenomenon that happens when you have newer employees hired at higher salaries just because things tend to move as time goes on. CIRES HR has done an excellent job of evaluating the salaries that CIRES has. So this is not the issue that it used to be, but there can sometimes be a perception of compression. And that's why CIRES HR would want to be part of this conversation. So compression would just refer in this case to a brand new person was just hired and I think that they're making what I'm making and I've been here for 5 years and I don't like that. So those kinds of conversations can be happening as part of the ASA process, but you don't want to use the merit process as a way to correct those compression issues. You want to use career track, out of cycle increases as appropriate, or just communication with CIRES HR to find out whether or not there's actually a compression issue or if it's just a perception of one.
Awesome.
So career track and status and plans, this should be part of the objectives and plans section if appropriate. I would say consider making a 1 and 5 year plan. As long as you're not at the senior level, that's going to be appropriate. And this is a useful tool for career planning that you can reference throughout the year. Additional documentation. If you get to the end of the ASA process and you feel like you have more to say, either you don't concur with what your supervisor has said, or you just want to provide additional documentation, you can include those additional documents with your ASA. Those would be sent as a ticket to CIRES HR. Signing of the ASA does not mean that you concur. It only means that you have completed the process and allows for eligibility in the merit process. So if there is any disagreement during the ASA process, we still need you to sign in order for you to be eligible for merit in January. And you can reach out to CIRES HR for help with these conversations. You can provide this additional documentation, but we still do need those signatures. What this additional documentation includes will vary depending on the employee. And so reach out to CIRES HR with questions about that or submit the additional documentation with a note during the process. So supervisory responsibilities and the annual summary. And this refers to supervisors who supervise supervisors. If you are at the top of a supervisory chain, please consider checking in on how that's going for everyone in the chain. This should be part of the evaluation process for you and any supervisors that you oversee. Some special things to consider are, is the number of supervisees reasonable or is there overwhelm? And is there a need for extra support? And this is just another training advisory and plug for all of the resources that we have available. Supervisor best practices and other performance management trainings are currently not required. So we don't check you off in a database that you've attended any one of these trainings. But HR requests that all supervisors review the training materials to support this process and to ensure best practices are being followed. All newly assigned supervisors are invited to meet with Jimena Ugaz of CIRES HR to go over the expectations and are given access to these resources and an opportunity to ask questions. You can also reach out to CIRES HR at any time. And please don't wait if you're struggling or need support. Peer review is the process of a supervisor performing outreach to employees, peers, and supervisees or close collaborators for feedback. This might be something that you would go to if a science advisor isn't participating in the process, or if you just want to get a fuller picture of performance from a person's work group. Peer review can be an excellent tool for gathering the whole picture and can be helpful, again, if science advisor input is not available. You want to be sure to disclose to your supervisees that you are soliciting feedback from your peers. Ideally, supervisor and supervisee will establish the list of peers and collaborators together. Supervisors should be transparent about what is being asked of the peers and collaborators, and ideally the questions will be similar across the peer and collaborator group. Obviously, that's not going to be possible if you supervise people who have vastly different roles, but you should attempt consistency wherever possible. And if you do peer review for one of your direct reports, it should be done for all of them for consistency in your team. So the final step, and this is a big difference from last year, and I just want to say a huge shout out to our IT team. The DocuSign process is now automated in the ASA app. And what this means is that we will no longer have to log into DocuSign, download PDFs, etc. So this is fantastic news. It's going to save all of us so much time. So thank you to IT. So how it will work is a supervisor will submit the rating and a DocuSign is generated and emailed to the employee. This happens just with the click of a button on the app. The employee will sign first and then it is routed to the supervisor. So it doesn't go to everyone at the same time. It goes to employee first and then supervisor. Once all parties have signed, the full ASA PDF is available on the ASA app for view and download. It only takes just a few minutes for that fully executed PDF to be uploaded to the ASA app, and then you can see it. So this is fantastic. It's really fast. Nate did a demo for us, and it's very, very much appreciated and a time saver for all of us. The supervisor can still edit and send back to the employee as needed. So if you get through the process of routing that DocuSign and on further reflection, you think, oh, that rating needs to be changed. Or if the employee says, I forgot to include a training that I want to take, or I left out something, they can void that DocuSign and send it back or to reroute it. Or they can send the whole ASA back to the employee for editing. So those two options are available on the supervisor view. Just note that if you do that, it will void and override any existing DocuSign in the system and restart the signature process. So you'll have to re-sign those DocuSigns. It's not a big deal. It takes just a few seconds, but it does overwrite the previous DocuSigns that are uploaded to the application. Other important details, merit increases will be effective January 1st, 2025. For 2025, the Regents have approved a 4% merit pool for the Boulder campus. CIRES HR will be providing more details on how that will be distributed in future. So probably after the ASA process has concluded, usually those details don't come until fall or early winter. Any employee hired prior to 7/1/24 should complete a full ASA. That sounds a little bit awkward for those of you who join us really late in the performance cycle. It can be an abbreviated version. You don't have to do a full ASA, but we do need those rating sheets in order for you to be eligible for the merit process. And we want to make sure that you're not waiting 18 months for your first raise if you're hired before 7/1. Those hired between 7/1/24 and 9/1/24 are merit eligible. And they can use the app as a planning tool, but no rating sheet is necessary for them. That conversation happens separate from the rating sheet. Not exactly sure. Something just failed on my end here. Are you guys still seeing my slides? Okay.
They're back. They're back.
Oh, we're back. Okay. And one last note is even if you completed a career track application this year, you still need to do the ASA. So they're separate processes, even though they are connected. The ASA can be used as a planning tool for the career track. And your career track promotion can be used to guide your ASA as well. Sections on the professional development and other areas are not covered in the career track, and those can be emphasized going into the ASA process. So I'm going to hand this off to Jazmin, as she is our CIRES HR career track specialist.
Thanks, Lucia. So yeah, we'll dive into how the career track process and the ASA are connected. As Lucia has mentioned, the ASA is a logical touch point for conversation surrounding career track eligibility, timelines, and needed milestones for a successful pursuit of a career track promotion. This is a good time to discuss whether you and your supervisor both agree you're ready to submit a promotion application based on the following: years in service, which is the time eligibility, and then the career track criteria. So the years in service requirement is really only one aspect of readiness for a promotion. So you should be familiarizing yourself with the criteria and eligibility requirements before you submit your ASA and meet with your supervisor. Next slide. So this is just some general information for the career track. We just want to provide you with the link and let you know that the career track section of Inside CIRES has many pages filled with detailed information. So we have information on the specific career track descriptions and criteria for each level and type of track. So that's the associate scientist, research scientist, and administrative associate. And then there's different levels throughout those three as well. So 1 through senior. There are subtract definitions and criteria. Those are specific for the associate scientist and research scientist positions. There's information on years in service, requirements, and lists of required materials for each application level and type. Those materials sometimes differ depending on which level you're going up for. We also have information on reference letter requirements depending on the type of application, and information on the timeline and deadlines. And we have our FAQs, which are updated regularly. Next slide, please. So now just for the timeline in general. So the process officially starts during the ASA season, which is summer. So even though you'll be submitting it later in the year, this is really the start of the process and when you're having that discussion with your supervisor. So next, between summer and the time you submit your application around late fall, you should start thinking about who you'll request reference letters from, and that's if your application does require additional letters beyond your supervisor letter. Then at the beginning of November, we hold a career track information session. So if you are planning on submitting a career track application, you should attend this session. If you're a supervisor and you know that you have employees that are going to apply for promotion either this year or in future years, we encourage you to attend that session as well. Also, at the beginning of November, we have the official career track announcement. It's a PDF document that we upload to post on Inside CIRES, and that has the finalized schedule and any other updates. And then the deadline to submit your application is the end of the first week of January, and you will submit that online through Inside CIRES. And lastly, we just have this full timeline link for you to access later. Next slide. Oh, I think we skipped one. Back one, sorry, let's see. Okay, now this is just a few specific details about the online application itself. So when you're ready to submit your application, you can access that from Inside CIRES on the homepage. Just want to note that you can click start and you're able to save and continue at a later time. So by clicking start, it won't require you to upload any materials at that time. However, it will ask you to enter your supervisor contact information. And once you click save on that page, they'll automatically receive an email. And that email serves as a notification that you've started your application, and it also requests a letter of recommendation from them. So that's just a quick note. If you're curious and you go in there and click start, that will send the email to your supervisor. And then if your application requires additional letters, the system won't send any formal requests until your entire application is submitted. And just a tip for you, you'll be working on your promotion packet during a busy time of the year. So that's with holidays, possible vacations, end of the year. So you should get a head start on your materials because of this. Next slide. And then lastly, this is just for supervisors specifically. We just want to note that supervisors are responsible for understanding the different levels and requirements of the career tracks so that they can better support their supervisees. And for a productive conversation around this, supervisors should be familiar with time eligibility requirements and criteria before their ASA meeting with their employee. Additionally, supervisor support is required for a promotion application, and a strong supervisor letter is crucial for a successful promotion. If you're discussing career track plans during the summer, you should have plenty of time to create a detailed and thoughtful letter for them by the end of January. So just something to think about there. And lastly, just want to highlight that while an employee is responsible for the bulk of their promotion application materials, this process very much is a partnership between both employee and supervisor. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jazmin. I just want to make a point on that supervisor letter. In our implicit bias training materials from last week, we did include some links to look through to remove gender bias and racial bias from recommendation letters. So I highly recommend that you check those out. There's even one where you can input your letter and it'll actually highlight sections for you to be aware of. So I am here to talk about the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion ASA prompt. So for the last 2 years at CIRES, employees have been asked to input activities that they've completed that might be relevant to our DEI strategic plan. And so I'm just showing you the data that in the first 2 years, we did not have it in the professional development category. So we moved it up to the professional development category last year, and it increased our response rate from in the 20 percentile range to 52.9%. These 343 responses, I did look through all of them. So I did remove any responses where someone said that they didn't do anything this year, they plan to do things. It was really 343 responses that were codable. So I actually did code all of these responses. So I read through them, and some of them had multiple codes. So I'm going to show you what the codes are, so you have a sense of what people write about in this section. But just so you know, it's not going to add up to 343 because some people had multiple codes. So we can go to the next slide. So this first code is personal learning. So people talked about either attending professional development sessions, reading a book, listening to a podcast. That was 146 responses. We had 17 responses where people talked about attending or working on recruiting events to try and increase the diversity of our workforce. 84 people talked about organizing or coordinating some sort of DEI event or DEI committee meeting. We had 33 people talk about hiring improvements. So if you've attended a training on inclusive hiring practices, or even if you've just worked on removing bias from your process using rubrics, any of that would fall under hiring improvements. Or if you are working to increase your pool, right? The best way to increase diversity in our workforce is to work on increasing the diversity of our pool. So that kind of goes back to recruiting, but we tried to pull those two apart. Many people working on mentorship, 108 people. That wasn't just the CIRES mentoring program, that was also some NOAA mentoring programs. 36 people talked about working with our education outreach team, which is now CEEE. Cultural improvements, 86 people, we were coding that as people working to improve an inclusive work environment. So it could be that you're trying to help a new employee on board and you're welcoming them into the team. It could be that you're using norming processes on your team to help transparency about how things are aligned with each other. You're helping to raise voices on the team, making sure people are all expressing their ideas. Those sorts of things are what we're coding as cultural improvements. And then 39 people indicated that they were part of a DEI committee. So it just gives you a sense of what people wrote about last year. So what we wanted to do in the prompt this year is make it a little bit more clear how we're hoping to gather information on how people are working towards our DEI strategic plan. And so you may not feel like you're doing things in this category. So I'm trying to provide lots of opportunities for people to engage. So you might be doing this work on your own, but we also have lots of ways to engage, both coming to workshops, and we will email you after this course with a new online training. So you can just do it on your own, an asynchronous course where you can think deeply about inclusive practices in the workplace and how do you supervise from an inclusive lens. But we're hoping that everybody finds some way to engage and write about the ways that they're working towards improving relationships across our institute. So a lot of your work might feel like you're working on your technical competencies. This is the work that you do to work on how you work with others and how you make sure in your workplace that everybody has an opportunity to do their best work and to thrive in that space. So we can go to the next slide and I'll show you what the prompt is going to look like this year. So first, we're just going to give you some text from the DEI strategic plan so that you know what it is. So at CIRES, our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion shapes our work culture and is essential to how we practice excellence and integrity in environmental research. Our mission includes the following DEI strategic imperatives, so 3. The first one is called Inclusive Workplace Culture. That's what the online course is addressing, fostering an inclusive, respectful culture that recognizes and embraces the diversity of our communities. Then we have the second imperative, building capacity to successfully recruit and hire a diverse workforce. That online module will be available in a couple weeks. And then the third one is creating authentic partnerships with those who are most impacted by our work and with organizations that serve underrepresented and marginalized groups in environmental sciences. That module will be out this summer. Okay, and then we can go to the last slide. So you'll have that to read, and then it's going to ask you to check boxes to indicate how you participated. So this is a really good way for us to get a sense of what's happening across the Institute, but I want to make it really clear that this is not an opportunity to be judged or evaluated for how you do this work. So we're not putting this in the ASA so that somebody can give you feedback on it. It's more that we are collecting data on the work that's happening, and we're also giving you an opportunity to highlight to your supervisors something that you're doing, or maybe even an opportunity to ask for having more time or more opportunity to engage in DEI work. So that it's a good opportunity to have that conversation with your supervisor, but you shouldn't feel that this is an opportunity for any type of feedback. So there's lots of checkboxes here with examples after each checkbox. So we will let you read through that when you get to the ASA, but hopefully you'll feel like anything you're doing fits into one of these categories. And then there's going to be an open box where you can tell us more about what you're doing, which I would really encourage you to do. The more we have a sense of what's happening, the more that we can highlight those activities, the more we can build on them and learn from you. Many of you have really engaged work that you're doing that we'd like to learn from. So feel free to give us more information in the open box, or if one of the categories isn't there, please tell us so that we can add it next year. So because we're close to the end, I'm not going to read through all of them, Lucia, but they're in the slides and you can go read about them while you're filling out your ASA.
Thank you so much, Becca. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that CIRES HR is here to help. Please reach out if you are having challenges with any one of these different processes. Becca can answer questions on DEI. Jazmin will grab questions on career track. If you need IT help, you can't get into your Inside CIRES login, or something isn't working as you think it should, please reach out to CIRES IT. Their link is right here. I also just wanted to mention, as Jazmin was saying about the career track, these processes are really linked. So if you are planning on putting in a career track application, this is the time to disclose that to your supervisor. If you're not putting in a career track application, make sure to think about, by reviewing the criteria that's online for career track, when it would be appropriate for you to do so and what is needed, what skills deficits you might have, what support you might need in order to make that next step in your career happen. So even if you aren't in the place right now where you're like, yes, for sure, I'm going to participate in this process, you can still engage with the training resources. You can still look at the career track site. You can still consider what the career trajectory looks like so that it doesn't take you by surprise when you think, oh, I've met the minimum years in service. I'm going to start looking at that now. Some of these things take a while to build in. Publications take a long time to build. Proposals take a long time. Some of the skills, they just take time. So give yourself the benefit of understanding what the next step might look like for you. And this ASA process is that first touch point for that. So I'm going to pause here and open it up for questions for anyone who might have any about anything that we've covered here. You can feel free to put items in the chat. You can direct message any of us, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself, whatever you feel most comfortable doing.
Lucia, I have a question that came to me, and it might be for Angela. Angela's still here, I think. It's really a question sort of digging a little bit into when, as an employee, I can talk to my supervisor about my pay and compensation. So it's clear that there's guidance in terms of using career track for that. But if somebody's sort of in that gap, right, where career track, it's not an appropriate time for that, how can they, or what's your recommendation for having that conversation with their supervisor so they don't, and I understand we have this, people might not know about the compensation study, but I think it's also just good to give general advice about how to take that on.
Sure, absolutely. So certainly any supervisors or employees can reach out always to CIRES HR for guidance around those conversations. And usually supervisors, some depending on where they sit and in which group, they may or may not have a lot of context about their direct report salary. So just know that maybe going into the conversation, and that's why we say supervisors and or the lead of that unit both can reach out. And so, we would just, I think that the supervisee can either ask the supervisor or maybe even their unit lead, kind of if they have questions about their salary, trying to better understand how it was assigned, why it sits where it does without, obviously naming direct peers, but they can talk through. And if they need support in that, that's where HR can come in about all of the factors that we think about that go into compensation. What's the degree requirement? How many years have you been working since that degree? The type of work and nature of work that you're doing. So those are some things I think you can certainly lead with, just saying you're curious about how your salary was determined and why it sits where it does, and if they can give you more context for that. And again, if the supervisor then needs some support for that conversation, or the employee does as well, feel free to reach out. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's also important to highlight to supervisors that it's important to help guide your employees, right? To give them coaching and help them strive for new growth and think about different ways they can work on their career path, because everyone needs that, right, in their workspace to feel encouraged. So what are some ways that you can offer growth opportunities as well?
Absolutely.
Other questions?
Just mentioned that a few of our trainings talk specifically about how to do effective coaching. So we have best practices for supervisors, and then Jimena also offered a training last year. Those are linked at the same link that I just dropped into the chat. Some of those are in 2023 and some of those are in 2024. So that training library can help bolster those supervisor skills when it comes to coaching and the expectations around helping your supervisees through that career growth trajectory and those difficult conversations around compensation. I saw a question way far back from Leslie Smith about CIRES supervisors encouraging science advisor participation. I don't know that it's your responsibility as a supervisor to specifically encourage that participation. We were opening the door to our science advisors, but really the guidance and the comfort level of those individual science advisors is going to vary group to group. So In some labs, there's going to be a much more open door to providing that feedback. And you certainly can say, hey, the ASA process is underway. You'll be receiving this information from your advisees in the coming weeks. Please feel free, if you're comfortable, to provide that feedback. But we don't want them to feel pressured because, again, there is varying guidance and there's varying comfort levels on behalf of our federal partners, and their participation, while incredibly helpful, is definitely optional. And we can always highlight as well that the feedback should be confined to those project level discussions, and that is in alignment with the cooperative agreement. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but if you need specific support, obviously reach out to CIRES HR. But we don't want to appear to be coercing involvement if our advisees are not comfortable participating. There's another question. Can we reach out to ask if science advisors plan to participate? I would prefer to know sooner rather than later. Yeah, I would say absolutely. That there's no reason why you can't explicitly say, do you plan to participate this year? There's nothing that doesn't violate any rule anywhere. It's basically just disclosure. And that will also help you with your timelines. If you know that a science advisor isn't going to provide feedback, then you can go ahead and you can write your assessments immediately following the ASA being submitted by that employee, or you can find other ways to solicit feedback. Maybe it's to offer a verbal conversation. Maybe it's to sit down with the employee and consider whether or not you want to do peer reviews. Maybe it's to reach out to CIRES HR and say, hey, I don't really know where to go from here. How can I get a full picture of performance for this person? So yeah, that explicit question is absolutely acceptable to your science advisors. Any other questions, Becca or Jazmin, coming to you specifically? No? Good. Well, we did leave an hour and a half for this training just to make sure that if people did have any questions, that we had plenty of time to address that. If there are any of you on this call who are brand new to this process, I can stay on afterwards and I can show you how to access the app and do a little bit of walkthrough there. I know that the very first time you do this, you can feel a little bit like you're starting from zero. In out years, it's much easier because you have a lot of the content started and you know what it's supposed to look like, but I'm definitely happy to stay on the call and walk through for those of you who are brand new, or feel free to reach out to CIRES HR, feel free to reach out to Becca, Jazmin, or myself if you have any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking here, or you just want a specific follow-up on one of the areas of content that we covered.